Hi, welcome to the show in action. I'm your host, Wendy, and on today's show, we have as a guest Randy Rayess, who is the co founder of VenturePact. Welcome, Randy.
Thanks, Wendy.
It's great to have you on the show. Do you mind giving everyone a little introduction to yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Randy. I co-founded VenturePact with a good friend of mine named Pratham a few years back, and we were very focused on solving the problem of mainly around technology in companies. So we saw that companies could leverage software better, and mainly in the way that they serve their customer and in the way they operate internally. So what we were trying to solve with VenturePact is how do we help companies figure out how they can better use technology, and then once they figured out what they can be doing, the next question which we help them solve is how do they go about executing on that? Given the constrained resources, given the challenges with building technology, and that's what VenturePact is focused on.
Okay. So when someone first comes to VenturePact, how do you help them solve the first problem?
Sure. So not all companies have both problems. Sometimes companies already know what they want and they just need to execute on it, right? So if it's a tech company and they have their product and they're building V2 of their product or they're adding a few features, they usually come with specific insight into what they want. And we're helping them on question two is like, how do we find the right people? And yeah, but I think you're asking more about the companies that don't know exactly what they can be doing with technology, right? That first question.
Yeah, well, I'm just starting with what you started with and
Yeah.
describing like the two initiatives of your company.
Sure, sure. So for the first part, I think the key is the the key is to understand what they currently use, right? So a lot of the times, companies either have an existing, if it's a bigger company, they have an existing ERP system. If it's a smaller company, they have, many tools and SaaS products that they're using to execute on specific pieces of the company, right? So for recruiting or for task management or for collaboration, etc. And so what we're trying to do is help them get a sense of their biggest pain points um, from their internal company standpoint, and then we get a sense of what are their how do they currently serve their customers, and where are the problems there, and what are things they can do on an ongoing basis with their customers, or what are things they can do on a one-time or more um, uh, on a more or a less regular basis with their customers when it comes to technology to help build relationships with the consumers or with the businesses that you work with. And so those are the main way we do that is we kind of get a sense of what they have, their challenges, and then we come in and talk about that what can they do better, where can technology come in.
What kind of challenges do you commonly see?
Sure. So a lot of the times in the customers in the when the customer facing standpoint, many businesses feel that they're not able to build strong relationships with their customers or not able to communicate easily with their customers, and so they want to figure out ways in which they can engage them, right? So sometimes it's building mobile applications, sometimes it's sending them a specific um, something by mail that tells them, here is here, this is a package and it's a gift, and in the gift you'll get a special code that's going to give you access to this game, and then this game is going to be very engaging, and based on that type of customer you'll have a specific type of game, a mobile game where they can go on and play some sort of game, so you're going to have that more engaging um, more experience for the customer. And then other types of problems is, a lot of the times our customers, if they're in a hotel and there's a lot of challenges with booking and communicating. So in that sense, they think about how do we how do we better engage with the customers while they're on our in the hotel? So that there's like, okay, how do we build mobile applications? How do we provide a better experience for customers? So that in that case, it's let's walk through the whole flow. from booking to arrival to in-room to checkout. And how do we think about that whole process? And it's through the lens of technology and what technologies they currently use. So I would say it varies a lot by company, but on the customer-facing side, it's how do we innovate from a marketing and customer experience standpoint, and on the internal operation side, it's what processes are you kind of speak with a lot of their employees and figure out what's repetitive, what are things they keep on doing over and over again, and what processes can be automated and what processes can be simplified through technology.
Mm-hmm. So now once you have a pretty good idea, let's say you have the hotel and they want, a mobile app so that when a person has already checked in, they can decide, I want to go to the spa and get a massage or play a round of golf or whatever let's say this is a resort has for them. You said you can also help them with the technical execution of that.
Right. Exactly. So, so that's like the major part of what we do, and that's kind of how we started only doing the second piece. And the key there is what exactly does the first version of the product that you're trying to build, or what exactly does that include? And now we're assuming people are building products. Sometimes people come to us to build a remote team, so they just want a second team. In that case, it's an ongoing engagement. But if they want a product, or they're just trying to build their V1 or their next version, it's all about prioritizing features, getting the features down, understanding what they want, and then after that, it's actually finding the team that's going to work with them. And that the second piece of this second part is applies to both building remote teams and building products. And that what that comes down to is really a great screening process and an understanding of the preferences of a specific company. So a company located in the US is going to want their development team in, their first priority would probably be the US, but that would also depend on their budget. That would also depend on specific other preferences that they have. Their second preference might be usually is South America or Canada because you're in the same time zone. And so you start to see how US companies versus, companies in the UK will have different preferences for location. So the goal for that next piece is to understand their location preferences, the technical skills that they're looking for in a developer, and then any specific industry nuances that exist that might constrain who you can work with. Once we get a sense of all those criteria, then we have a pre-built network of development teams that we've worked with and that we've screened over the last few years all over the US and globally. And so that's where we come in and make the match client companies to partners and development team partners.
Mm-hmm. So you're not finding them in-house developers. You're finding them a firm who will help execute on their vision.
Yeah. So a lot of the times, if you're trying to build a product, you're outsourcing it to a second team, to another team. Mm-hmm. And you want to find the right partner, and you want to think of them as long-term partners. And most of the time, but sometimes companies try to build second teams with us where they want to build out a team that is that they hire on a monthly or on some sort of a monthly or longer term basis, and those people act as their second team. So in that case, it's more of the relationship there's a fine line between whether or not it's outsourced versus an employee of the business, but they can build second teams with their system.
Mm-hmm. So, in helping people connect with a team that's going to fit in with their culture and their product, what are some questions you ask, or some criteria that you look for? We spoke about time zone a little bit. What are some other things?
Sure. So we usually separate it into two parts. So the first part is technical skills and specific industry nuances. And the second part is culture and values. So in the first part, you're looking into platform what systems do they currently have, and are they building on top of it, right? Obviously, if you have a Ruby team, you want your team to build the new product in Ruby, just so you can easily communicate it back and forth, right? So, so you want to see what do they currently use, what is their internal dev team, what are the skills of their internal dev team. Then you want to understand any frameworks or any frameworks or specific types of products. And so is it focused more on web or mobile? Is it an application, or is it a cross-platform? Is it a mobile optimized? Is it a browser? Is it going to run in the browser and going to be mobile optimized and responsive? So you want to understand the technology, then the device that's going to run on, or that's going to be optimized for. Then you want to understand the budget. So budget and location come hand in hand. So so you want to kind of tie those two together. And the third piece, budget and location are important, but the budget is also a function of the features. And so you can start to see how it becomes complicated, because as you move by location, the budget, the price changes, and as you change the features, the price change. So, and then as you change the skill set requirement, the price changes. So we have to play that game between all these different forces to get a sense of what's the best fit. And once you get that, where you have a good understanding of the budget, the features, and the location preferences, then you can get a good sense, okay, these are the types of companies that would fit in with what they're looking for. And so those are the key things on the technical side. There's other things that we look for that are more nuanced, especially within healthcare and finance, when you have government regulations that constrain specific information and where it can be and how it can go. And sometimes in those scenarios, only US companies are eligible to work on those types of projects, but those are more unique. So that's part one. It's the technical skills. Are these people, like, do they satisfy the basic criteria? The second part is the cultural fit and the values. In that part, usually it's the client company that does the interview and makes sure that there's a good fit in culture. So the client is going to interview them. And in that part, they're going to ask specific questions around what do you value, what excites you, what about our mission is interesting to you, why do you want to work on our project? And when you get a sense of that from their team, you can see, are they interested in the specific problems? Are they people that we're going to get along with through the ups and downs of any development project? And that's the second part.
Mm-hmm. It's what are some mistakes you see companies commonly make? I'm kind of jumping to a conclusion here that companies come to you after they've tried to outsource themselves and had a bad experience and realize they need some outside help in choosing a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely have seen that a lot, where companies come to us after they've had a bad experience. Sometimes also, a lot of times, companies come to us after um, they've heard a lot of horror stories from other people. But you're right, and the moral of the story is that a lot of people make mistakes here, and a lot of times there's problems. And the most common mistakes come around screening and management. So screening, are you actually finding the right firm, or are you just choosing the cheapest one because you have some specific budget constraint? And part two is management. The common problems there is people think that the problems are always a function of the development team, and sometimes they don't realize that the way they're communicating is not clear, and they're leaving a lot of assumptions and they're leaving a lot of gaps in their communication because either it seems obvious to them, or the person leading the project is super busy and has 10 things going on. They don't have as much time to handhold and communicate clearly. And so management is a very important piece, and I think it's one of the most, it's really about communication. And when you have gaps in communication, really doesn't matter that much who you're working with. If it's unclear, if you're not responsive, it's going to cause delays. It's going to cause problems. So these people who don't have as much experience working with remote teams are going to need to be educated. They need to understand that that's a key piece of an engagement.
What are some signs that someone who's managing an offsite project, that demonstrate that there's some communication gaps?
So that's a great question. So I would say there's a few things. One is if there's no built-in process around daily stand-ups, um, daily reports, and then feedback, and there's no strong feedback loop around, what's going well, what's not going well, what are the challenges we're facing. If the development team doesn't have a good relationship with the client and is either not telling them about the challenges because they think that the client is unreasonable, and or because they don't know exactly the process or tools that they should be using. That's one example. Two is is the development team aware of like all the specific tools that they can use to communicate, right? Are they using a task management platform? Are they using a version? Are they doing proper version control? Um, so you can see how are they documenting and commenting their code. Is there a code review happening on the client side on a weekly basis? Is there, so all these specific things you can see if you look at with the engagement and what's happening, and you ask about, how do you guys communicate? You can get a very good sense as to whether or not they are communicating regularly, clearly, and are covering the basics when it comes to remote work processes.
Mm-hmm. So, one thing you said in there I think is interesting, which is the developers don't feel secure in talking about the problems, um, because the the customer in this case is being unreasonable. You may have said unreasonable. I'm not quite sure, but what are some common things you see people doing that are interpreted by offsite teams as being unreasonable?
Yeah. So I think the problems in this scenario vary between types of remote teams. So if you're working with a remote team where they're in your same city, but they're just remote, as in not in your office, um, there generally is like a very limited cultural barrier, and you're still able to build a relationship because you do probably meet once every week or once a month in person, and so the gaps there tend to be less. When you're working with remote teams where you're going cross country, cross time zone, cross where and culture, and there's big cultural differences. That's where you start to see some misunderstandings or misinterpretations of what other people are saying, and so a development team might feel that a client is being aggressive and respond differently, and vice versa. The client might feel that the development team is being sensitive or not as respectful as they should be. Whereas in reality, it's the way they write or the way they communicate is not as clear as it can be, or they're leaving out specific things. So, and this is especially relevant when it's done over text, because when the information is being conveyed in text format, you don't have the emotional cues and the visual cues that you have when speaking with someone in person, and so you can easily misinterpret what's happening. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where a lot of the gaps happen is, some of the gaps happen there. It's where there's a misunderstanding of what the text actually means
Mm-hmm.
and what's behind that.
So when you have a client and it's decided that because of budget and features and their needs that they can have a successful engagement with someone who is, let's say they're in New York and their team is in Siberia. So you have language, you have culture, you have time. What are some tools you'd set them up with from the get go to help mitigate some of these challenges around the culture and the communication?
Sure. So when it comes to tools, there's really a few key pieces: chatting tools, communication and calls, video calls tools. Um, the third piece are task management tools, and the fourth is cultural propagation, knowledge management types of tools. In the chatting tools, HipChat, IRC are two of the more popular and common ones. Of course, you can use Google Hangouts and Skype. The for as other chatting tools. When it comes to the calls, and in that sense, Squiggle is a great tool. A Fusebox is a great. I think now they're called Fuse actually. There's another product like a lot of people use, which is like Uber Conference. You can also use um, Skype video, Google Hangouts. So there's a lot of tools under video for remote work that can be used. The third one is task management. So Asana, Jira, Basecamp are all common tools in that sense. There's also other tools that help you execute on task management better. And so those types of tools do allow you to capture screens easily, allow you to take images. And so what you're trying to do in that area is, how do I, especially when it's communication around design or on the front end, how do you easily communicate about specific parts of the front end? And so there's a lot there around, capturing a part of the screen and commenting on the screen, and being able to draw on an image easily, and then make that part of the task, make that part of the specific the task that you're assigning. The other piece, which is cultural propagation / knowledge management. For cultural collaboration, like Yammer is a great tool. WordPress P2 is a great tool for to allow for people to easily talk about what they're doing over the weekend, or good articles they've read, or post photos about a fun trip, and kind of like it creates creates kind of a company, an interesting company dynamic. You can even like do polls and things like that on Yammer. For knowledge management, you want to, some people build this in-house, some people use external tools. The key here is you could use a workflowy, you could use a Hadel, you could build your own. It kind of looks, a lot of the times when it comes to remote work, it kind of looks like an internal Quora of some sort, where it's easy to manage knowledge and information. That's a long-winded answer, but there's a lot that goes on in the space. And those are a few of the tools.
It was a big question too. I want to talk a little bit more about culture, because I think we're just are trained in our culture, and we're conditioned to speak a certain way and interpret things a certain way. And having like the Yammer stuff with social communicating, I think it's awesome to kind of build like a certain camaraderie among the team. But what are some things to help mitigate those just communication misinterpretations?
Yeah, I think you want to create an environment. You want to create an environment where asking questions is encouraged. And this is mainly done in the beginning through a training program. When you have a great training program at the beginning, where values are clearly communicated, where expectations are clearly communicated, and where the method and way of engagement is clearly trained, then people are going to be much more comfortable asking questions. So you really want to encourage people to ask questions, and that way you're going to get a better sense of a gap or a hole that you're going to have to make an assumption on. It's better to just ask that question and be comfortable with that. That's the first part of the gap. The second part that you asked was, how do you build culture, right, remotely?
I'm like, was there two parts in that? You have a really good memory for giving a lot of information while remembering everything I ask, because I don't really remember what I ask after I ask it. So if something comes into your head about talking about building culture, that works for me.
Sure. Okay. I'm not sure if you asked that or not. I thought you did, but I can just go ahead and answer it.
Go for it.
The question about building culture. So as you mentioned, and I had mentioned also, the Yammer is a great tool to talk about what's happening and create that camaraderie. Other things with remote work is, remote, I think, is a lot of times misconceived to mean you never see someone in person. But remote just means you're not in the same office. So you could actually be in the same city and be remote. But there are, of course, a lot of times where you have remote teams that are cross-country. And in that case, for each smaller team, you want to meet around once a quarter or once every 2 quarters as a team. And you want to meet as a company once a year in person. And you can usually choose some exotic, fun location on the beach to create a great experience. But having that in-person experience helps build a relationship, and the level that you communicate at and the trust that you build, you'll see it be higher when you have these types of experiences together in a location where everyone's kind of on a vacation, no one has other obligations besides, they blocked out that week for the trip. And so you start spending all your time together. You actually build very strong relationships. Um, and I think that part is great. The other part that is important is, of course, when you're doing calls, try to do video calls. You get the visual cues. You start to get to know the person better than just the voice. And secondly, a lot of the times when you do your daily check-ins, a lot of companies just, especially managers, are so busy that they're focused on optimizing the length of the call, or minimizing the length of the call, I should say. And they instead, and what they sacrifice on is actually building relationship and understanding the people they're working with. So the concept of doing personal professional check-ins, where you keep that professional check-in on a daily basis, but every week you try to have a more personal check-in where you get a sense as to what they're doing this weekend, what do their kids like to do, what is their family, is there a family, is there a wedding going on, or kind of things like that, what sports they like to watch. You get just getting a sense of their personal lives. You don't want to be too intrusive, but you just want to understand high level what's going on. And that gives you also, you're able to better relate to them by asking them those questions. And, and they then ask you the questions about yourself, and they learn more about you. So I think keeping that one every week, keeping personal check-ins is also great.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. What percentage of the companies that you connect with an offshore development team invest in doing these offsite meetups and culture building activities?
Sure. So this is more common for, okay, so I should back up. This is more common for people who are building remote teams than outsourcing projects. So if you're outsourcing a project for 3 to 6 months, it's less common for you to choose an exotic location and all meet up in that exotic location. When you're building a remote team, after you've been with the team for 3 to 6 months and you see it as more of a longer term engagement, that's when they start doing it. The second part is when you're working with an outsourced team, usually you just travel to their location or they travel to your location at the beginning before you do the bigger trip. And the bigger trip, again, is more for this when you're working with a second team and where you're augmenting your team. So I would say rarely are you going to have a big trip in the first 6 months. Usually they're going to wait a year and to kind of validate, at least 9 months to validate that this is the right relationship. And then they'll do the trip. They'll organize some sort of trip. I would say the large majority after 9 months will do a trip. And then of the people that do a trip, there's probably today, I would say maybe 1/5 of them are comfortable doing it in an exotic location. Most of them are still going to the other company's location. So they'll travel and they'll meet in person. But because they're not a distributed team, they're just two teams, they'll just go to the other person's location or they'll come to theirs. The companies that do the more that go to some like beach resort are usually more distributed, and they have people all over the world. In that case, it's much more beneficial to choose a beach location because everyone's going to travel anyway. You may as well make everyone travel to a great location.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things with budget and office space and costs
Mm-hmm.
come to play, but with purely distributed teams, it makes more sense from a budget standpoint and from an experience standpoint to go with a beach location.
Yeah. Well, I would think from an experience standpoint, it could be really good to have the meeting on neutral ground
Agreed.
because no one is completely immersed in the other culture if it's about creating a new culture together. But I also think it would be really good to go to each other's places because then you get to experience what that culture is like too. So
Agreed.
it seems like there's a lot of investment that would go into really honing in on culture. So it's interesting to think about because a lot of people think of going outside of their area to save money. But there's a lot of other investments that need to be made.
Agreed. 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 I think, and usually, I don't go into too much detail about the training part, but after there's some sort of trial period and you see there's some good fit in the training part, you do want to go you want the other person to come to to the main location to get a sense of the main, your culture and your environment. If this is again assuming we're doing cross border, but
Hmm.
even if you're doing within the country, you do want them to get a sense of your culture, the company culture.
Oh,
So
definitely.
having them come to your company is great. And you also if you're, especially if you're doing two locations, it's also important for you to be in their location too. But then for the company-wide event, which is not a function of one person being trained or a team being trained, it's more for like a company-wide event.
Hmm.
That's where exotic locations come more into play. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of forces that come in.
Yeah. I'm really interested in this whole offshore versus offsite team
Yep.
because in my head I haven't really separated them before, but it's a really interesting concept that like you're just pushing this workout to be done and you'll get it back when it's done. Interacting with them here and there versus like this is a team and they're kind of becoming part of the energy of the company.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but
I
that in the case where you're building this team, the team exists as its own company though, or it existed already? Because you said the thing about you guys have partners. I'm talking about specifically in the case of the connections that you're creating.
yeah. The question you asked is in the case of the connections we're making, are they one team or multiple? Like either there's a client team and a development team that we usually connect. The
Yeah,
Go
and
ahead.
then if that development team is going to be like a team and not just like offshore, um, what is the organization of that team? Is it a bunch of individuals working for the company? Are they working through you? Are they working through a third company that already exists that you have a relationship with?
Usually, yeah, usually it's the latter. So usually we partner with a company that has a few teams of people that are great in software, and so we screen the company for their past work, and there's a whole process around that. But once after we screen the company, that company then is going to be the facilitator to choose. So we find that this client wants a team that has experience in healthcare in these languages, focused on iOS, and has a great mobile designer or whatever the specific scenario is. And then we make the match. We'll match them usually to three companies, and they'll choose one. When they choose the firm that they want, usually they're screening for cultural fit. They then will work with that company to work, and then once they work with the company, they'll choose the right team within the company, and they'll work with that team. Um, the way of engagement will vary. Sometimes you have a project manager on the client side and on the supply side that usually work together. Sometimes the team in the client team works directly with the individual developers. So there'll be like four developers managed by one person. On the client side, I mean, there's actually a lot of different models that we've facilitated. It really depends on both the development team and the client team's preferences as
Hmm.
to how they want to manage the engagement. And as the teams scale, like as you scale your second team, the model changes. So if you start off with three people and you scale that up to a 10-person team, that's obviously going to look differently than a company that starts off with five, or that's going to, usually we don't recommend starting off with 10, but some companies will start off with a bit larger teams. And in that case, also, you're going to have a different model. So you're going to see different ways. But at the end of the day, it's going to be client team working with a development team, and that development team is, you know, managed. But if it's in a different country, that development team is usually managed by a company.
Cool. Well, thank you. This is like a lot of, we covered a lot. You're very detailed with your answering my questions. It was very impressive.
Thank you.
And then remembering what I asked. I'll need to learn that skill, improve. But is there anything else you would like to share with the listeners before we say goodbye?
I think that was actually pretty detailed. We covered a lot, so I'm pretty good on my end.
Cool. I'm good on my end too. Thank you so much for everything that you shared, and have a great day. And thank you, audience, for listening.
Thank you.